In 1989, servant of God Thea Bowman gave an address to the U.S. Bishops' Conference on the experience of being Black and Catholic. "What does it mean to be Black in the church, in society?" she began. "I want to tell you about a church." Here she breaks out in song from an old spiritual. "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home, a long way from my home. Sometimes I feel like an eagle in the air. Still, I'm a long way from my home." Thea Bowman was a Black Franciscan sister, originally from Mississippi and a convert to Catholicism. A gifted educator at the elementary, high school, and college level, she was also an inspirational speaker among Black Catholic congregations and a trailblazer in highlighting Black Catholic worship and sacred song. She delivered her enthusiastic speech to the bishops from a wheelchair less than a year before her death. And in 1990, the University of Notre Dame posthumously awarded her the Laetare Medal. A woman so in love with the church, so in love with the faith, so in love with Jesus, Sister Thea still acknowledged that as a Black woman, she was on a long pilgrimage looking for home, a home that Jesus told her could be found in the church. Talking about this home, the church she longed for, she said that to be Black and Catholic still though often feels like being a second or third-class citizen of the Holy City. A true home is one that welcomes all contributions, all backgrounds, and all cultural expressions. Sister Thea called for a home in the church where everyone has equal access to input, equal access to opportunity, equal access to participation. To get there, God's people must overcome their own divisions, their own alienation, and their own stereotypes. "Cardinals, archbishops, bishops, my brothers, please help me to get home," Sister Thea begged. And as she closed her address, she broke out into song again, asking that all people love the Lord and love their neighbors. That's all we got to do. It's been over 3 decades since Sister Thea's prophetic sermon, but her claims about racial inequality in the church may just as well be made today. And to broaden the conversation, it's not just about being Black and Catholic. It's about being Black and American, Black and human. It's about being Hispanic, Asian, Native American, or Middle Eastern in a society that doesn't always celebrate diverse experiences. While it's especially concerning when racist attitudes and behaviors place a stain upon the life of the church, we see racism touching so many aspects of our society and culture, in government and politics, in law enforcement, in business and economics, in healthcare and in education. Sister Thea sang the answer, the healing remedy: love one another. But how do we get there from here? How can we see each other, people of every race, color, language, and social condition, as common pilgrims journeying to God? In 2018, the U.S. bishops released a pastoral letter against racism, "Open Wide Our Hearts, the Enduring Call to Love." The letter is a call to conversion for people of faith, building on Sister Thea's vision to overcome division and unite our minds and hearts to Christ. It's a call to enter into the experiences of those who have been harmed by the evil of racism, both those within the church and those in the wider human family. Before we even start to move forward, though, we have to start with where we are and acknowledge where we have been. Racial unrest in Ferguson, Charlottesville, and Minneapolis, among many other cities, are recent memories that stand in a long line of historical moments stretching back through the civil rights movement, the Jim Crow laws, and the early slave trade. The hashtags Say Their Names and Black Lives Matter drive new campaigns for justice, building on the legacy left by Diane Nash's freedom rides, Rosa Parks' bus boycott, and Martin Luther King's civil rights marches. As Catholics, as Christians, as Americans, as human beings, we must honestly confront the hard questions. Are we opening wide our hearts? Are we heeding an enduring call to love? Are we living into the truth that salvation is for every person, that Jesus comes to unite one human race to God? Are we listening to the cries of the oppressed? Are we seeking reconciliation? Are we willing to change our attitudes and behaviors to be the people that God has created us to be? The bishops write in their letter that racism arises when the person, either consciously or unconsciously, holds that his or her own race or ethnicity is superior, and therefore judges persons of other races or ethnicities as inferior or unworthy of equal regard. When such an attitude leads to another person's exclusion and mistreatment, it is sinful. Racist acts are sinful. Racist acts violate justice. Racism occurs as people ignore the fundamental truth that we share a common origin in God and are all brothers and sisters created in His image and likeness. The sin of racism is an outright failure to acknowledge the image of God in others. It comes through deliberate acts by individuals, jokes, comments, disapproving looks, harassment. It comes through coordinated group activities, vandalism, rallies, hate speech. It comes through structural inequalities in housing, unemployment, education, and incarceration. It comes through charged rhetoric in our public discourse about immigrants and racial minorities. It comes through the position of silence that we adopt when we fail to challenge what we know is wrong. Open wide our hearts is not the Church's first statement on condemning the sin of racism. At the Second Vatican Council, the pastoral constitution Gaudium et Spes demanded that every type of discrimination, whether social or cultural, whether based on sex, race, color, social condition, language, or religion, is to be overcome and eradicated as contrary to God's intent. And it expressed great regret that fundamental personal rights are still not being universally honored. In his encyclical on the Third Millennium, St. John Paul II urged the Church to become more fully conscious of the sinfulness of her children, recalling all those times in history when they departed from the Spirit of Christ and His gospel and indulged in ways of thinking and acting which were truly forms of counter-witness and scandal. The U.S. bishops themselves wrote a similar document to Open Wide Our Hearts in 1979 entitled Brothers and Sisters to Us. There they condemned racism in all its forms, arguing that such a radical evil in society demands an equally radical transformation in individuals, in the church, and in the world. Despite all these words to combat the sin of racism, Open Wide Our Hearts confronts the fact that its evil still exists in both subtle and blatant displays. The bishops acknowledge that people are still being harmed, so action is still needed. The invitation to take action against racism is an invitation meant for all people. Racism takes deep root in the human heart, and so all must examine our consciences. In addition, we must help our civic, our religious, and our social institutions examine themselves. What feelings of superiority do we harbor deep down? In what ways do we benefit from certain privileges compared to other individuals? Where do we see fear, bias, xenophobia, or racial profiling in our communities? How do the institutions that organize our society unjustly treat people from racial or ethnic minority groups? How well do our schools, our churches, our businesses incorporate the experience of marginalized individuals? Overcoming and defeating the evil of racism is no small task. It demands conversion of heart at all levels of our church and in all levels of society. But it begins with a single person. It requires doing justice, openly and honestly acknowledging our failures and restoring right relationships between us. It requires loving goodness, building up one another, and pursuing peace. It requires walking humbly with God, asking Him for the necessary grace to rid the world of every trace of discrimination and hatred. When we do justice, love goodness, and walk with humility, we will finally be walking toward that true home to which Jesus invites us all.